It really is scary.
Yeah. And I have two children of my own, two daughters, and they're 22 and 18. And I think that that's where one of the stances that my husband and I took in raising them is that we've got to empower and educate our children in the realities. We can't shy away and not have these uncomfortable conversations because even no matter how hard we try, technology advances beyond what we can keep up with. And as a parent myself, it's outgrown my capacity to really understand. Like my kids at this age know more, but I've also had very honest and hard, vulnerable conversations with them from a very young age just because of the line of work that I'm in. But I mean, all of us need to be talking to our children about the realities of how to identify when somebody reaches out to you and tells you, hey, you look pretty. Oh, you probably don't want to respond to that if it's a stranger because what they do is they're casting a net to hundreds of women or hundreds of girls or children to see who will respond. And then they'll take that category and keep fishing to get down to the two or three people that they can definitely engage and again coerce into a relationship. And it's such a high profitable industry when you have one person that can work with you. It's an ongoing cycle.
For
So
sure.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Heart and Hustle podcast. Today is going to be an incredibly important conversation because we have not only the president, but also the executive director of Refuge for Women here with us. Today's conversation is going to be about some really important topics, talking about Abby and Rosie's journey. We're going to talk about understanding trafficking vulnerabilities and prevention. We're going to talk about the role of things that we've seen blow up in our society like OnlyFans and all these other type of things. We're going to also talk about the intersection of mental health and social media and so much more. Abby and Rosie, welcome to the show, guys. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Thanks.
awesome. We're excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely, guys. So in order for us to kind of really get started, I think it's really important to talk about our journey in why this work is so important. So Abby, can you kind of introduce yourself and talk about a little bit of your history on why this work is getting so much of your time and energy?
Absolutely. So, I've actually been with Refuge for Women for 9 years now, but my involvement in anti-trafficking work has been going on for about 15 years. And so, in 2009, I found myself on a mission trip in India. And I think a lot of the misconceptions that we still have is that trafficking happens outside the country and in third world countries. And that's actually how my journey got started, was just serving overseas. But during that time, the Lord just really started to open my eyes and show me that we had our own problem right here in our own backyard. And I've always said one of my key advice areas in this space is you got to find your lane and know what you're comfortable with and doing and what your gifts and strengths are in order to sustain. And so I knew that my heart was for the long haul love. And so I wanted to get plugged into some residential program services on the state side. So anyway, through a lot of really cool connections, I got connected with Refuge for Women back in 2015. And at the time, our organization was just based out of Kentucky, but our founder was looking at expanding its locations to become a nationwide organization. And so North Texas, Las Vegas, and Chicago were the three locations that pioneered what it would look like for Refuge for Women as a whole to be a nationwide organization. So
I think it's so cool when we have those experiences in life that are kind of those aha moments. For you, it was, your time that you spent in India, which is amazing. For you, Rosie, you talk about your 10 plus years of time in the mental and behavioral health space, but also you consider yourself a justice seeker. What does that mean?
Yeah, for sure. So, kind of like Abby mentioned, I love this demographic. Yeah, my heart runs to them because in a lot of ways there's great overlap with the population that we serve in my own story. So, like you said, I've been in mental health now for about 10 plus years, and I've served a lot of these vulnerable populations that we'll expand on later: foster care, homelessness, eating disordered. And so I've been working with women who have been exploited for the last 4 years now. And that has been interesting. And I consider myself blessed to be able to advocate for them And what I mean when I say justice seeker is there are populations that we as a society care about. Um, on a surface level, but when it requires more of us, whether it's time or finances or backing, we tend to shy away. And so there are these people groups that are marginalized and oppressed. And so my heart runs to them because I know what that's like in a lot of ways. I am someone who grew up in poverty. If someone looked at my story, some would say that I am a textbook statistic in a lot of ways, but praise be to God. And so when I think about people's vulnerabilities, it's not only the women we serve who are not nameless, they have faces and real stories, but I also think about people that I know and love. And I think about little me 20 plus years ago, right, who would easily fit a lot of these lanes. And so, the reality is, this is a part of my story. I am a vulnerable, I do belong to vulnerable populations in a couple of different sub areas. And so there's a part of me that wants to shed light on what that looks like on a macro level and not just have it be something that we say we care about, but that we put actions, work, and policy behind.
There's something really important for us to recognize, and Abby, you touched on this, but Rosie, you also hit on this perfectly. There are so many vulnerabilities in populations that are in our communities. This is not a problem that we're seeing on the other side of the world, but this is happening here. Why do you guys think that this is such a misconception, right, in our communities, where when we hear about human trafficking, when we hear about sex trafficking, people say, that's got to be Southeast Asia, that's got to be Europe, that's got to be Africa. Why do you think we've come to that?
I mean, I'll start, but I can honestly say one of the most commonly asked questions that we get from people is how many of the women in your program are actually citizens of the United States? And the honest truth is that 100% of the women that we have served are from the United States. And so that is definitely a misconception. But traffickers prey on vulnerabilities. And so they insert themselves into people's lives to fill a need. Then that creates that dependency on the trafficker. So if you have dysfunction in your home and somebody steps in to show you unconditional love to build a relationship with you, they pry on that vulnerability. And if you are in the foster care system and you move from house to house to house and you don't have stable community or friends or a group at school to be plugged into, you look for relationship online, and that is a vulnerability.
What are the reactions of the people who ask that question? And then you say 100% of the people who we serve are US citizens. What's the reaction like?
I mean, they're always shocked.
Yeah.
As they should
Literally,
be.
yeah, they're always shocked. And I think too, like just to expand on that a little bit is I think too, as a society, we can stereotype what we think a survivor or a victim of trafficking looks like. But the truth of the matter is that it affects all socioeconomic status, all race, all gender, all ethnicity, everything. And so we've had women come through our program that were from very prominent families. And then we've also had women come through our program that have run away at very young ages because it was safer on the streets than it was at home. And so the just dispelling those myths on what we think it is and what the truth is part of our advocacy work.
And Rosie, I think it's really important for us to talk about, you and I share an environment together. We're both here in Las Vegas at the time of recording this. So what are some of the misconceptions people even have about our hometown in Southern Nevada here?
For sure. And this may segue into the question that you just asked a second ago, but I think a lot of it is American arrogance. We would like to think we are maybe further along than we are. We take unhoused populations and we don't want them noticeable from the skyline, like, right? It's like, well, you can't be visible in this area because this is touristy. And so I think it's very similar to that. Yeah, so I think there's an arrogance attached to it. We would like to think that we are further along than we are. And acknowledging these issues puts it in front of us. And I think that's exactly counter to what we really want to do. But here in Las Vegas, there are some things we can run from, but there are other things our city is known for in a way that we can't get away from. We can't get away from the notion that we are known as Sin City, right? If we're thinking like sex sells here, addiction is prevalent here, gambling, right? There are certain things in Vegas we are known for, but when we think of the demographic that we serve, it is everywhere in this city. And that's what we're not only are that's what we're known for, but we champion that. And so our location is vital because we are in a city where it is literally woven into the DNA of our city. But I need women here to know that there are safe spaces and safe people who are willing to advocate for you and protect you and provide a haven away from the realities of Las Vegas.
Abby, we've talked a little bit about the vulnerabilities, right, of people who are in our communities. Is there a misconception, right, that a lot of human trafficking kind of looks like the Taken narrative, right? Someone's stolen off the streets and we've got somebody who's like chasing after them. What does this really look like in our communities? What are we facing?
Generally, it is people are trafficked by people they know. And I think there's two things I want to make sure to address here because I teach a class once a week still with our residents, and even today it was a discussion. Not only that, but on the other side of that, our women don't even understand that they're being trafficked. They feel that they are just in an unhealthy, abusive, dysfunctional relationship. So I think there's two components to that. So, what I mean by when people are generally trafficked by individuals that they know is sometimes, unfortunately, it is within their family and their family system, and that is part of what their family has built on for generations. It might be mom might have a drug habit, and they might sell their kid to help sustain their own drug habit, and that's just the cold hard truth of some of the situations that we've heard about. But the other part is, like I said, these traffickers, they pry on vulnerabilities. And so they might court somebody for, it depends on how long it takes 4 days, 6 months, a year, however long it takes to insert themselves into a woman's life, they will become dependent. So oftentimes these women feel that they're entering into a romantic partnership and that they have been dating this person for a very long time. And then at a certain point in that relationship, the change starts to happen, and then they start to be coerced in a different direction of a body is a reusable commodity. I'll say that again for the recording purposes, but a body is a reusable commodity, and so you really don't ever run out of a demand, and so it could be highly profitable for a trafficker. So however long it takes for him to groom a woman into his control, he will do, especially if he knows that it could have a high return. And so on the other side of that, when I talk about the women that we serve, I love that we have tons of awareness, and salons and airports are hanging signs that say human trafficking if you feel like you've been trafficked. But unfortunately, women don't self identify as that either. And so as a society, we still have some education and awareness to do within the trafficking space so that women can understand what's going on with them, and then we can reach them better so that, like Rosie was saying, they can realize that there's resources out there for them to get help as well.
I think it's really important to also talk about the current landscape of where we are in society, right? A lot of relationships are built not in person, but online today. And Rosie, in our previous conversation, you talked about some platforms that we might not even think about, but like online gaming and Pinterest and other places. So let's kind of dive into that.
Literally, when you think, like I have a 9-year-old son, right? He is religiously on Roblox, right? Or Fortnite. And honestly, Keenan, when we think about platforms used for grooming, really, we just need to think of anything with an inbox, with a DM. Anything that allows communication can be used for grooming or recruiting purposes. It is so normative for a middle or high school age kid to be online or be on social media, and there be a regular person that they game with, and then they begin chatting, right? And it starts out innocent, but you don't know if the other person on the other end is actually 16 or whether he is 56. And so social media is a prime place to groom and or recruit because you can hide behind a facade that you've created. And if you're good enough at it, in complete honesty, then you can create a very believable story that could have someone thinking they are dating someone their age who's sweet and kind and generous, and here's the photos to prove it, and you're none the wiser about who's on the opposite end. And so social media, while it can be great in a lot of ways, it can be very dangerous when we're thinking about populations who are vulnerable, who may not have oversight, or an adult saying, wait a minute, let me peruse through this and make sure everything is in alignment.
And this conversation is so important because in 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast and said the biggest threat to the American society is not another viral pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Now, when we talk about all the societal factors like things like catfishing and everything else and these online personas, this is a really scary place to kind of be participating in if you're not aware of the threats that are out there. I heard that a really interesting analogy on a podcast a couple weeks ago. And the analogy was, would you ever, as a parent, consider putting a window on your child's crib where anybody from the internet could come in, show them any image, talk to them, speak with them in a private manner? Absolutely not. Well, what about your daughter's bedroom window? Would you give a window for public access that people could hop into? Well, guess what? That's exactly what these devices are. We're not giving our kids access to the world. We're giving the world access to our kids.
And that's scary.
It really is scary.
Yeah. And I have two children of my own, two daughters, and they're 22 and 18. And I think that that's where one of the stances that my husband and I took in raising them is that we've got to empower and educate our children in the realities. We can't shy away and not have these uncomfortable conversations, because even no matter how hard we try, technology advances beyond what we can keep up with. And as a parent myself, it's outgrown my capacity to really understand. Like, my kids at this age know more, but I've also had very honest and hard, vulnerable conversations with them from a very young age, just because of the line of work that I'm in. But I mean, all of us need to be talking to our children about the realities of how to identify when somebody reaches out to you and tells you, hey, you look pretty. Oh, you probably don't want to respond to that if it's a stranger, because what they do is they're casting a net to hundreds of women or hundreds of girls or children to see who will respond. And then they'll take that category and keep fishing to get down to the 2 or 3 people that they can definitely engage and, again, coerce into a relationship. And it's such a high profitable industry when you have one person that can work with you. It's an ongoing cycle. So
For sure.
Abby, what do you think about, and Rosie, of course, about the prevalence since the pandemic of platforms like OnlyFans? Right? I've seen, from my personal perspective as a man in this society, so many women who have flocked to this platform because it creates an opportunity for them to make money. And there are actually agencies out here that do exactly what you talked about, Abby. Find somebody on social media. Hey, you're incredibly pretty. What if you just sent us pictures of yourself and we could manage your chat? We could send out DMs. We could get more people. We'll split your revenue. This seems like a system that is baked for failure at the long-term horizon. What do you guys kind of think about with all the prevalence of exactly what we're talking about here, platforms like this that are so popular in society?
Rosie, I'm going to let you take this one because, again, like I said, I'm outgrowing the age of this
For
cool
sure.
stuff.
It's
so.
funny because I was definitely going to let you start. Yeah, but I think when we think OnlyFans, I mean, it's not shocking when we live in a world that is so pro the porn industry, right? So OnlyFans almost seems like a way for women to control it without the cameras and all of those things. But I think the larger question, Keenan, is why as a society are we at a point where women are in a place where their body is the first thing up when we're thinking about quick ways to make money? Why is it feet picture? Why is it body pictures? Why is it if you log on online and you subscribe to my account, then I'm going to allow you to see more of me? I think the larger question is, how do we get here, and why is it socially acceptable for that to be $1 million stream of income? I mean, it's not like women make $30, right? Like, women become millionaires through platforms such as OnlyFans. And that's because there is a demand for it. There is a demand. And I think we have to address why that's the first thing that's up, like why the body is seen as a commodity, but specifically the women's body.
I mean, the prevalence, right, of pornography in today's world has tricked and skewed the mind of men to look at women very transparently as transactional items. Exactly. And that in itself is terrifying. So how do we have more important conversations about what masculinity really means, right? Not putting women in vulnerable positions, not taking advantage of people, not looking at women as expendable items that we literally just swipe our credit card for, and you get your $3.99 subscription and you get access to some of their most private, intimate stuff. I mean, it's like we need to fundamentally have the conversation at a foundational level.
Absolutely.
And I'm just worried that when we let social media influencers have this conversation for us, like you said, Abby, we have a whole generation of people who don't want to have that scary conversation one time, but the impact on the rest of somebody's life is a digital footprint that lasts forever.
Right. But I also think it goes back to those vulnerabilities. It goes back to the single parent home. It goes back to fatherlessness. It goes back to foster care, right? Like if I don't have a dad or a prevalent male figure and I've never been affirmed by a man, well, then when men come and say, oh, you're pretty, you're gorgeous, you are all of these things, and you are feeding a void that has never been historically filled for me. And so I think it goes back to these vulnerabilities. It all starts there. It starts in childhood, and they shape us so much so that in a lot of ways they determine who we become. But I think when we're thinking about social media and OnlyFans, we have to ask ourselves how many of these women belong to some of those vulnerable populations that we talked about 10 minutes ago. And I think it's in that we'll find some of those answers.
I'm thinking to myself, how do you both stay so vigilant and so present and showing up for others? Doesn't this seem like this work in itself is incredibly emotionally taxing? I think about compassion fatigue. I think about the long-term runway of showing up and being that safe space for so many people. How do you guys balance the need to protect yourselves with boundaries, but also helping people in some of their most vulnerable moments?
Honestly, a lot of it for me comes with the people that I work with. We do draw strength off of each other because we can help lift each other up when the other one's down. And I think there's an unstated uh, support system within this line of work to where the sacrifices that it takes on not only on you personally but your families, but man, when you can see the wins and you see the redemption, and that's one of the things that I love about our lane in this line of work is that being part of a restorative program, we get to see the hope and healing that can come from devastation and trauma. And so personally for me, that gives me hope to not give up and to remain steadfast. But it also, I couldn't do this work without the support of our team and our staff. Because when you do respond in crisis together, you really do create a bond that is beyond just a normal Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 job. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I'm like, man, I just want to my new goal is I want to be a wheelchair pusher at an airport because you can just be like this nice, happy, fun, friendly face, just get them to the next gate. There aren't moments that I desire for something not as, taxing. But at the end of the day, the redemption and the hope that you see through the services that we provide and women, I'll show up tomorrow over and over again if it means one more.
For sure.
What about you, Rosie?
For sure. No, I agree. Honestly, Keenan, I don't think that I'm doing anything special when I think about what the scriptures call me to. The Bible talks over 59 times about loving the least of these and mentions the widow and the orphan and the fatherless. So when I think about the demographic that we serve, that's that. We serve the least of these. And so I feel biblically compelled in one way to step in and to love them well. But also, that's my story. People stepped in for me in a very real way. And it's so easy for people to see who I am today and accredit that to choices that I made and all of these things, when the reality is a lot of this is a byproduct of people who loved me well in some really hard seasons and said yes to me. And that's what we do. We say yes, not because we are great people who are just really kind and really compassionate, but because the Lord bids us to, but also because our women deserve it. They have dignity and honor that I don't think their narratives can take from them. And so really our job, like Abby mentioned, is to remind them of that. It's to believe for you that you are enough until you can believe that for yourself. And once you do, then you can convince the next woman that she is enough. But I think more than anything, the Bible compels me to. And I think in doing so, the Lord strengthens us with the things we don't have to make it through those really, really hard moments. But like Abby said, the good stories, there are some stories that keep you going because you got to see firsthand transformation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Abby, if you were to go back, let's say 5 years, and have a private conversation with that version of Abby, what advice would you give to her when she be navigating the time to get to where we're at here today? Or anything that you would tell her to avoid, to lean into? What advice would you give her?
Oh man, Keenan, that's a good question. I think if I could talk to myself 5 years ago, I I think in my leadership growth journey, I lived in a lot of fear for a very long time that uh, I had to figure it all out and know all the answers. And I think one of the greatest things I've learned in the last 5 years that I probably wish I would have known five sooner is surround yourself with people that are better and smarter than you, because it really will make your job easier. And so don't disqualify yourself because you don't have certain credentials or an education. Personally, I did not finish college because of my before Jesus and after Jesus story. But man, the people that I serve alongside of, they literally are some of the most high scholared people. And surrounding yourselves with people and not being intimidated by other people's strengths to build a well rounded team is something that I think is invaluable. And don't shy away from that.
Rosie, here's part of a question for you. We talk about some of the vulnerabilities that these victims face in not having a supportive, family, not having structure, feeling vulnerable, having people come into their lives who give them a sense of belonging and a sense of hope that maybe they didn't experience before. What about where we're at currently in society today with all of your experience, right, in the mental and behavioral health space? One of the biggest crises we're facing at a generational level is how women are viewing themselves because of the lens, how they see themselves on social media. Some statistics shared in our little framework was in 2012, 9% of girls had major depressive episodes. In 2023, that number went from 9% up to 31%. Do you ever get worried about how these devices and the platforms that we spend so much time on are impacting our self-worth, but also creating opportunities for people to become vulnerable? What's kind of your two cents as somebody who spent so
Absolutely,
much
and
time here?
without question. I have a little girl, right? So when I'm thinking about all of that, I'm thinking about the reality of the world now. And my daughter is 5, and I cringe at the thought of what it'll be like in 15 years when she's headed toward 20. Um, but the reality is, social media, like I mentioned, is great for a lot of things, but then there are other things that are really difficult. Like when I think about women with the disordered eating, a lot of things like that, like take place or are the result of social media and a body dysmorphic disorder where you're seeing all of these bodies on social media, transparently speaking, some that are not even real, they're paid for, but then that is how we view beauty. And then when we have people who say like, oh, she is the most beautiful woman because of her hip shape or her, like all of these things, it concocts this idea that, wait a minute, if that is what beauty looks like, but I don't look like that, then what does that mean about me? um but I also think about, again, those vulnerabilities. If you don't have a dad in your ear who's reminding you of your worth and your identity and how beautiful you are, then why wouldn't you run to a world of social media and upload pictures, more provocative or whatever, for likes and comments because you were looking for that? You need something to tell you, hey, you're enough, and hey, you're worth it. And that's what social media does. So much so that when we're not getting that, we're either compelled to show more, or you fall into this state of depression because it's like, wait a minute, well, my friend got this and I didn't, and then there's comparison and like all of these things that are not favorable. But that's what happens when 90% of our time is spent on social media and involved in a world that is really not based in reality, right? It's not real. You can get on social media and call yourself a lawyer and put Esquire behind your name, and people are none the wiser because, well, they said it. But that's the reality. And so we tend to believe that everybody is an expert who has a like well concocted story, and we run with that so much so that when they tell us we're pretty, we believe that. And then when they say we're not, we believe that as well. But again, that goes back to those vulnerabilities. Who knows you in real life, who is able to affirm you and speak into and debunk lies in real time? Because those are the people that I want you to lean into. Those are the people who know you and who are able to affirm you in a way that like 2,000 people who've never met you in real life never can.
Yeah, we live in a crazy time to think about how much energy we truly put into our digital world. You know, the average 18-year-old today spends about 9 hours a day on their device. On average, I don't know how many people are actually getting 9 hours of sleep
Literally.
a day, right? And so the digital world is becoming more real than our dream world. And the way in which we are kind of, I would say, curating and creating these masks for people to be able to dive into, giving us acknowledgement and likes and admiration, there has to be some sort of disconnect that comes with that as well. And recognizing deep down that all the pictures that I'm posting that are getting the most engagement have a filter on them, or I'm airbrushing or putting my stuff in Photoshop. It's just a really interesting time to think about the true power of authenticity and how much we need to lean back into it.
For sure.
Yes. Amen.
Sure.
Amen for sure. So, I also think, and this is like a hard right turn, but when we talk about just online access, I do think that that is one of the things that continues to fuel the demand because it's definitely at our fingertips. But I think it continues to increase because, you know, it is statistically proven that pornography is a true addiction. And I think as a society, we also need to move in a direction where it's not shame based when somebody is struggling with that and allowing and just uh, I don't know what I'm trying to say here, where it's not shame based, but allowing a lot more vulnerability and transparency with people who struggle with that to come out and be open and honest about it. Because much like a drug, you take a certain amount and that's not good enough next time, so it continues to expand. And it's the same way in the porn industry as well. Like you start small, but then all of a sudden that's not meeting the fix that you're looking for, and so you just continue to get deeper and deeper, and that affects our line of work tremendously. It definitely fuels the demand.
It's
Absolutely.
important for us to recognize as well that this is not some guy who creates all of these platforms in his basement or her basement by themselves. These are incredibly well-funded organizations that bring in some of the top minds for, you know, behavioral science and addictive behaviors and everything else. So when you think you're interacting with a platform, you're actually interacting with a supercomputer that is then trained by a whole bunch of incredibly smart people. And so destigmatizing the shame of saying, I started using this tool and now I just don't know how to get away from it is a community-based conversation that we need to come together around.
Absolutely.
So here's a question for you guys as well. Abby, you said earlier today that you were teaching a class. Okay. I want to know if we could get really tactical from your guys' perspective about educating and teaching a big class right now. If there are parents or concerned people in somebody's lives, what are some of the telltale red flags that we might see of someone's behavior, or they might be vulnerable? What are the things that we should be aware of so we can get ahead of this curve before somebody who we truly care about gets taken advantage of?
I mean, some of the warning signs that I would highlight or gone from being very social and active within social circles to becoming a little bit more withdrawn. So whether you're in the education system and you have a student that was an all A student last year and really thriving, but all of a sudden this year they seem to be really struggling, can't stay awake at school, those types of things, that would be some warning signs. And then also, you know, women don't actually keep the money that they earn while they're out working. But what they do get is some gifts in exchange from their traffickers. And so if you see somebody that is from more of a impoverished income family, but yet she has some name brand designer unit accessories, and all of a sudden those things start to enhance, that would also be something that would be a sign of it.
Yeah,
Rosie, do you have
for
anything
sure.
else? Yeah.
Yeah, I would also include a young girl who is being isolated. So let's say she's very social, she has families and friends, and then slowly she's dropping those friendships and she's not as open because one of the things that a trafficker wants to do is to establish credibility themselves and isolate them from any other voices in their life that could be loud enough to catch what's happening and then step in. And so they want isolation. They want you to believe that you're the only one. They're the only one in your world who is worthy of being trusted. They're the only one who loves you. They're the only one who wants the best for you. Your mom is just mad because she's never had a relationship like this. Your sister is just jealous of you because you look better than her, right? So that they want to get that young woman isolated. They want her to feel like he's the only person who is for me. He loves me. He would never, right? But then some of the other things may be a young woman who won't make eye contact or doesn't have her own, oh, I don't carry my own ID. My boyfriend carries it for me. Like someone who doesn't have control of their own identifiers, like things that would make you say, you're 21 and you don't carry, things that's taboo in and of itself. But they want isolation. They want to manipulate you psychologically. And a lot of people, when having this conversation, one of the first things that I'm asked is, why won't they just leave? Like, why did she stay? But that's much more nuanced than what it appears. When you consider psychological manipulation, it's years and hours and days of repetitive thoughts saying you'll never make it without me, and you need me, and you're not good enough, and you're ugly, and you're not worthy. And it's said so much that at some point you begin to say, wait a minute, maybe they're right. Well, maybe nobody does love me, because if they did, why didn't they come and look for me, and why didn't they? And then you begin to question everything that you knew to be true about your world. And they've manipulated you seemingly to the point of no return, and then everybody else has been pushed away. So then you're like, wait a minute, I don't have a relationship with my mom or my sister anymore because he did a great job at isolating me. And so isolation, a lack of eye contact, like Abby said, the young girl who has all of this designer comes from a very impoverished family. But honestly, Keenan, the hard part is there really isn't a well constructed list that's like, oh, it's right here. Because very rarely will every woman meet every one of those bullet points. You may have some that only meet three, and some where there are five. And you may have others where that, oh, she acted that way, but she isn't being trafficked. And so honestly, I think it's the art of knowing what it looks like. And I think, and this is probably true for Abby as well, that we've seen it enough that if and when we saw it, we could identify it, but it's not as cut and dry as say, it's these five things. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I mean, there's so many nuances in the work that you guys do, because when you guys are talking here, I'm thinking about all of just like the societal trends that we see as well, right? Everybody on social media who's younger is often trying to get a bag, and they might be spending all their money that they earn on a designer handbag.
Absolutely.
And if they come from an impoverished family, that's one indicator, but it's like, hey, is this really what's going on? Or there are societal factors that are swirling here? And it makes it so difficult to be able to kind of navigate. Now, we've talked a little bit about the problems, the challenges, the vulnerabilities. I want to talk a little bit about kind of the positive side of this, the impact that you guys are making. When it comes to what the future's looking like and the lives you guys are impacting on a daily basis, Abby, what gets you most excited about the future and the work that you guys are doing?
Really the hope and healing that comes through the women that come through our program. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are a national organization and have 6 locations across the United States. And so we are located south of Houston and Texas Gulf Coast, North Texas, Las Vegas, Chicago, Kentucky, and Pittsburgh. And currently have 10 homes opened and operating. And then in 2025, we're looking at opening 2 more. And so some of the things that I love that we get to do is that we do have a national impact. And just because we're located in those 6 places does not mean we haven't served women. We've received applications from 43 of our 50 states and have had over 250 partner agencies refer women to our program over the course of Refuge. And so truly the impact that Refuge for Women has on this nation is huge. And so when I hear impact numbers like that and the reach that we truly have, we don't have to be located in a city to serve a woman. Through our collaboration within the organization as well, we can relocate women for safety reasons. And so you might make an outcry in the Dallas Fort Worth area, but it's not safe for you to stay here. So I know that I could send her to Vegas, to our Vegas location, and know that she's going to receive the same quality of care, the same process and proven program outcome that we have. And so for that to maintain that standard of quality that we have to serve the women that we do and know that all of our locations operate at that capacity, I love it. I love it. So.
And you, Rosie, if we had to give a piece of advice from today for the next couple years, imagine we time traveled into the future and we could look back on this present version of Rosie. What advice would you give to yourself to navigate these upcoming years and the impact that you're going to make?
Yeah, I would tell myself slow and steady. This line of work can often be tiresome because we may not see results immediately. But what I don't want to do is give up because for this woman, it takes 9 months for a light bulb to go off, and another, it takes 2 years. And so I would tell myself to stay hands to the plow and do the work and trust God to breed the results. But I'm called to be faithful. And I would say steward well the season that you are in and don't rush to the next one. There is much to be learned here. And I want to do this as unto the Lord and to the best of the women that we serve. And so that requires me to be diligent in it, to become a student and an expert in it, even so that I can serve women well. But yeah, slow and steady, because we live in a world where I'm like, okay, what's next and what's next? And it's like, well, what if you just focused on doing what you are currently doing well?
I love that. Well, guys, I have to say, just hearing the firsthand perspectives of why this work is important and educating the audience has been such a blessing here with you guys today. Being able to share this space with you guys and knowing that you are having such a fundamental impact on individual lives that impact generations is something that makes me incredibly happy to have you guys on the Heart and Hustle podcast. Part of the tradition that we have as we end our episode here is we have our previous guest who wanted to ask both of you a question. So Abby, you can go first, and then Rosie, you can go second. What does courage mean to you?
Courage means, to me, courage is most of the battle. I tell my kids all the time too, 90% of the battle is just showing up. And so being courageous to at least getting yourself to a point to show up, even though it might be overwhelming, intimidating, you don't know what it's going to look like. Most of the time, it's better than what we have anticipated. And so to me, courage is showing up no matter what the circumstance are, without knowing what the outcome is going to be.
How about you, Rosie?
Yeah, I would say courage for me is speaking truth to power, is being willing to say hard things to the necessary people and not being concerned about what that means for me. It's standing 10 toes down on what I know to be true, regardless of, regardless of what that looks like, or the pushback or blackballing that may come to it or come with it. But yeah, I want to speak truth to power and say what needs to be said, even if that doesn't show me in a favorable light.
Well, that is a beautiful place for us to be able to put the bow on today's episode. Once again, for everybody who's been tuning in, watching, and listening, Abby, Rosie, I can't thank you guys enough for being the true definition of heart and hustle. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having us. It's been great.